Peter R. Breggin, MD, is called the conscience of psychiatry for his many decades of successful reform efforts. His scientific and educational work provide the foundation for modern criticism of drugs and ECT and lead the way in promoting more caring and effective therapies. His books include Talking Back to Prozac, Toxic Psychiatry, Medication Madness, Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, and now, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming Negative Emotions. Welcome to the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour.
Hello, my wonderful, wonderful, wonderful audience. Once again, I'm really glad to be here with you. I'm in my home office. I'm looking at the great glass window I had put in my office. It looks out above the old growth trees that surround our house and the hill, and looks over the frozen lake and not lake, God, I'm dreaming. Used to be on the lake, my frozen little pond. And it's a happy sight looking out over nature. And if you go to our fresh baked news, our fresh daily news, that's item 3 or 4 down on the website, and see the great postings by my assistant Ian, who actually lives in another state. We go back a long, long way. You'll see these studies that show that there are huge increases in mental health of children who live amid greenery, who live within, or surrounded by, or near to nature. And you'll find that in adults who go and visit parks in the middle of their cities have happier and more fulfilled lives. Just keep your mind, keep your heart open to what's out there in life. When we get all buried in ourselves, we lose track of what's out there in life. And, over millions of years of evolving, climbing out of trees and coming down and becoming gradually one shape or another of human, we were always amid nature. We were always amid trees and bushes and plants, and except for maybe, if you lived in the Arctic and that was limited to, the polar points, maybe bipolar, where you would, in the winter you'd be sad, and in the summer you'd be a lot happier. I would suspect if you lived amid the snow-capped parts of our country, which nonetheless briefly for many miles maybe below the exact top and bottom points, thrive with life briefly over the summer. And this is the Dr. Peter Breggin Hour. It's February 27th. It's me on Wednesday every Wednesday, as my dedicated listeners realize, on prn.fm. And today is Friday open mic. You get to call in. I'm going to talk a little bit about various things, but, starting in a very few minutes, I'll be happy to just start taking callers. So if for years or months or days or weeks or a few minutes you've always wanted to get to talk to Peter Breggin, I get so many people calling me every day wanting to talk to me that I can't respond to. This is your chance to chat with me. And it's just me and you today, and it's 888-874-4888. And you can go to the archives of the show on Breggin.com, find the archives up near the top of the listing of major stuff. And you can listen to last week's show and learn about empathy and the empathic person. It's a very worthwhile show, last week's show. Judith Orloff, who's a psychiatrist, but just doesn't talk or act like most of my colleagues, really presented an interesting show last week. And it just got me thinking about my books. I don't talk about them very much, but, my own book, The Heart of Being Helpful, is so right on about all the things we were talking about last week. And I started rereading The Heart of Being Helpful. And I'm just astonished at what a good little book it is, It is a book about love. It's a book about relationship. It's a book about how to live. It's a book about how to become responsible and to take over your life, The Heart of Being Helpful. You can get it on our website, and you can get it on Amazon. And then my companion book, that's a historical book, Wow, I'm an American, How to Live Like Our Nation's Heroic Founders. By now, more and more of you have gotten the idea that, unlike a great many reformers, I don't come anymore from a very left-wing position. I grew up always being on the cutting edge, so I was the atheist progressive in my high school in the 1950s when there weren't any. And I've always tried to think things through rather than to just accept some prevailing attitude among the folks around me. And more, I've come to really believe that this country was based on the most fundamental principles of caring and empathy that are expressed in the Declaration of Independence, that we're all entitled to life, liberty, and happiness. And along with that, in other similar documents that were written at the time, life, liberty, happiness, and property, being able to work for things and to own things. That this is the deepest empathy, it's the deepest moral understanding of human beings. Where does morality come from? Somebody wrote me to my dedicated email, bregginlive@hotmail.com, which I only advertise on the radio, so it'll be there for folks who tune into the radio. And one person wrote in, what were the origins of these discussions with Judith Orloff about empathy? And I've written a book about that called Beyond Conflict, where I go into the history and the background, the basis, the various thinkers, various religions, because it goes back deeply into religion as well, that have promoted loving your neighbor, caring about other human beings, finding a place in your heart where you weren't jealous and envious and driven to do things that injured other people, except perhaps in self-defense. Some people going to the position where they would say not even in self-defense. Gandhi had an interesting idea about that, which was to be welcoming, glad, warm, loving, but not to get out of the road. Not to fight back, but not to get out of the road. And in other words, not to give in, but to say we protest. In that case, it was rule of Great Britain and over India. And in Martin Luther King's case, who was a student of Gandhi and a Christian, it was about the same thing, the exact same thing. Not becoming violent, but being loving, reaching out, caring. Don't even diminish your enemy. I try not to spend a lot of time doing more than teasing my colleagues. I sometimes make serious analyses of what must be motivating them as a group. But not with rancor, not with violence or hate, because it's so bad for us. One of the distinctions I would make in thinking about our show last week, in which Judith Orloff talked about the empath, the person who is highly sensitive physically and highly sensitive, emotionally high, and with varying degrees, different degrees among people, different kinds of sensitivity. It comes out of older research, which you can Google, on the highly sensitive person, if you want to follow it as a psychological and therapy concept. But I should have said more about that there's a difference between being an empath and being empathic, interestingly enough, because the concept of empath, as Judith was talking about, is about being sensitive, feeling other people's feelings. Doesn't necessarily say you love or you care about the other person's feelings. It's having a built-in biological responsiveness to other people's feelings, to their suffering, to their anger, to their caring, and especially, and she emphasizes this a lot in the book, some negative feelings that can drag you down. Empathy is not so much about you're sitting with somebody and they feel angry and you feel angry, or they feel hateful and you feel hateful, or they feel sad and you feel sad. I think empathy, as I understand it and believe in it, and as I talk about it as a part of healing presence in my book, The Heart of Being Helpful, empathy is more about knowing what the other person is feeling, from what they're saying, from what they're expressing, feeling some of it, but not to the degree that it makes you want to avoid them because they're suffering, or to avoid them. And that's where Judith talks about, in her books, about putting a bubble around you, a safe bubble, and so on. But I want to emphasize that being an empath can make it hard for you to feel what I mean by, and most people mean by, empathy, which is a genuine caring, reaching out to another human being to be understanding, to be thoughtful, to express understanding, perhaps sympathy, but even more so a caring understanding. Because you don't want to get so sympathetic that it makes another person feel like they should be helpless, they should be overwhelmed. So you have to control that empathy, that empathic reactivity to others people, which is almost like a contagion. You have to control that in order to be able to sustain a caring interest in other human beings. So I wanted to kind of get that across and to make that distinction. Remember calling in. We have a number of callers already. Calling in is 888-874-4888. And remember the archives for all the shows, including last week's. I want to take a look now at some of the messages. And Thomas from Long Island has something he wants to talk about with feelings on Dr. Phil. I have no idea what this is going to be. Can we take number 3, Thomas?
Hi, Dr. Breggin.
Hi, Thomas. What's up on
okay?
Long Island? Is it snowing?
No, it's a little overcast and cool, but no snow.
Well, upstate, we've got some snow here in Ithaca and snow on the ground. Where are you on Long Island?
Near central Long Island, like Islip area.
I gotcha. Well, when I grew up, that was all farms.
Yes.
So tell me, Thomas, what are you calling in about?
I wanted to know your thoughts on the TV show host, the psychologist, Dr. Phil. And there's kind of another part to the question, but I'll kind of lead in with that. Regarding his, I don't know if you've seen his TV show. Do you know of him? I'm assuming you know of him.
Well, I know of him, but not a lot about him at all. He started on Oprah, and he and I crossed on Oprah, and I was on her about 4 or 5 times, and I talked more about issues, racism, drugs, and things like that. And one of the last things I remember when when talking with one of the show, not directors, but the people at the show who do the booking and
Producer.
stuff, and they said, we have Dr. Phil now. So Oprah had moved away from social criticism and things like that, and had gotten into the very touchy-feely Dr. Phil. And I was not emphasizing psychology as much back then as I am now, although I was always kind of writing about it. I was just so involved with the reform movement. So I've seen Dr. Phil a few times, and I don't really have strong ideas about him. So why don't you give me something to respond to?
Yes. Okay. I was just listening. There's an online podcast that's done by a gentleman, Joe Rogan, who is a pretty popular figure on TV. He had a TV show. He was a host, and now he has a host of this Joe Rogan podcast, and he has a lot of interesting people on, and he gets into a lot of different areas, including psychology and people suffering with different things, and he has a lot of interesting guests on, and he actually had Dr. Phil on last night, and I was listening to it live for a little while, and of course, the host, Joe Rogan, he started questioning Dr. Phil regarding medications for people and things like this, and it was interesting to, hear his responses, being that he's a high-profile person, and he was saying how he didn't really he believed they're being overprescribed and, psychiatric meds and things like that. It was just interesting because I almost got the sense that Dr. Phil might have seen some of your work recently in the way he was responding. So it was just interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. I've had no personal contact with him, but I think people in general, not just from my work, but people in general are getting more and more skeptical, cynical about all this prescribing of psychiatric drugs. I mean, everywhere I go. I had a man over my house yesterday, a couple of days ago, to help me set up a video. I keep moving toward doing my own videos, though God knows I got a big enough presence on. But I'd like to sort of just be able to put out fresh ones whenever I want to. And this is an interesting man. He's a specialist in doing personal videos, and he does filming, and he looks like a biker. He's an older man, and he has been a biker, and I mean, he's just dead set against all these drugs, especially kids. And I had the same experience recently in a limousine taking me away from a conference. A gentleman asked me what I thought of what I was talking about. He just started talking about a niece of his and how horrible it was for her on these drugs, and they were putting her out of reach, he said. So I think there is a huge groundswell. Things are very different than when I first started out. And although I don't reach everybody, I think my bigger effect than reaching everybody was I survived standing up on these issues. And of course, they tried to destroy me in every thinkable way. And the fact that I survived has allowed a lot of other people to begin speaking out. And of course, we have many books now critical of the psychiatric drugs by both professionals and laypersons. But
Yes,
have you listened to enough of Dr. Phil to form an opinion about whether he has wisdom, insight, empathy?
It's hard to say. I think I take all TV shows with a grain of salt, so to speak. I feel like it's a production and it's a TV show more sometimes than a it just happens to have this psychology angle that he's, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it's first and foremost a TV show. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, and it's impossible to have a major TV show without dumbing yourself way down, not because the public is dumb, but because the producers become dumb and the owners become dumb as they work their way up the power structure, because you don't get to have all that power and influence by being a critic of major institutions. So
yeah.
the thing I discovered a long time ago was the more you got to the top of the media, the less intellectual curiosity, the less critical intelligence they had. When I got, where I was being on 2020 and 60 Minutes and the morning shows and stuff, I used to do a lot more of that before they started advertising drugs. Now that they heavily advertise drugs, it's allowed in America and New Zealand to direct consumer advertising on these psychiatric drugs.
I think. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
He did get into the. I think the host asked him about the children, or somehow they got into the thing with the giving the drugs to younger kids, and he did speak out on it pretty harshly, that he feels it's wrong. So it was good to hear a lot of what he said, and I think this host, this Joe Rogan, who does the podcast, he's very good at having a good conversation, and these podcasts typically last 1 to 2 or more hours long, so they're pretty in depth in terms of the conversation.
Well, listen, thanks for calling in, Thomas, and do you listen regularly to the show?
I do. I just wanted to follow up one last thing.
Sure.
Getting the message out, do you think it would be a smart thing to try to get on one of the podcasts yourself, like this Joe Rogan, who has a very
I'll look into him. I may even have dealt with him in the past. I just don't recall. I'll look into it. I appreciate that. I seldom reach out. I wait usually because I'm so visible for other people to reach to me in the media. But let me look him up. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Breggin. Yes.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now. And it's really true, folks. I thought that as I got to up in the media and so on, that I would be meeting more and more intelligent people. But to this day, the lesser known, more local medias are likely to have more intelligent people there. And their intelligence, or at least their ethics, their refusal to just give talking points of drug companies or talking points of one or another political view, keeps them from moving up into the media. And you just don't have great intellectual discussions with these famous faces on television, generally speaking. I think there are some exceptions, but not very many. I've often remarked that when I was in Washington, D.C., and was frequently called to be on national television, and that was also before there was direct-to-consumer drug advertising, I would have much more insightful discussions with the driver who was sent to pick me up than on the show or even in the pre-show with the host. Frequently I bring up drugs or lobotomy. If I brought up lobotomy back in those days or shock treatment, I'd get a very direct, well, they do that stuff? That's crazy. Or drugging kids, oh my God, people would just, and then they talk about what they knew, what their experience was and how important it was to, keep your head clear. Somebody might tell me, I did drugs. God, it was the worst thing I ever did for myself, my family life. I don't want any drugs. There's often a more critical intelligence in people who are working hard to earn a living than in people who have these pseudo-intellectual jobs in the media. Maybe some of you have experience there, and you might get in touch and give a call in. I want to suggest that I'm not going to be able to answer questions about referring to doctors or referring to institutions, and go to our other website, empathictherapy.org, empathictherapy.org, and look down the left-hand side. You'll see people who have signed up and institutions who have signed up to not advertising. They don't get charged anything, but to make themselves known on that website, and who claim to have some affinity for my work. I can't vet them. I have no idea I just don't have the time, the capacity to vet these places. But you can check out places there. So John, who has been calling in, I'm not going to have you come on yet, John, but send in a message if you'd like to talk to something about some issues without specifically getting this information of a specific place to go to, because I can't do that for you. Excuse me. Do what I'm supposed to do and turn off my phone. How about Jeremiah in South Carolina? Thoughts on empathy? You there? Hello?
Hey, how you doing, Dr. Breggin? Yes, sir.
Oh, good. For a minute, I thought, I lost people here.
Good to talk to you again. I was on the last show when you had, I think a few weeks ago, Dr. Not Travis, but his name starts with a T. We were talking about love.
Yes.
I think it's the last show I was on. I missed being live last week, but I went back and listened in the archives on the show Empathy, and it was amazing. I know something you said earlier, that one of the distinctions between empath and showing empathy, I think, is showing empathy is more intentional. It's an intentional thing that I'm intentionally trying to, build a relationship and actually genuinely trying to see the other person's perspective or put myself in their shoes versus, like you said, and you guys talked about last week, an empath more so. That's just who I am. I absorb the feelings of someone, whether I necessarily want to or not. So I think that was a great key distinction that you guys talked about last week, and it was an amazing show.
Thank you. I'm glad. I thought it was an amazing show. I really recommend people go back to last week. Now, when you were talking about another show, I think you were. I had a couple of T's there, but I think you're talking about Terry Lynch back on.
Yes, that's it.
The 6th, February 6th, because more recently I also had on Andrew Thibault. But Andrew was talking about violence and drugs and stuff. But Terry Lynch, he's a marvel, another good show if you like to talk about empathy and also sophisticated critiques of the psychiatric drugs, because Terry Lynch does all of that. Terry Lynch is an amazing guy from Ireland. February 6th show. So what else do you want to share with us today?
I just want to tell everyone, definitely keep spreading your message. Like I said, I'm here in the southeast region of the United States, and I practice more so as a life transitioning as a coach,
right.
As I told you before.
Coach.
More so as a coach. You're trying to help people move forward, and get connected with their authentic purpose, and also add that extra support to help them, withdraw and psychiatric drugs to kind of rehab themselves, so to speak, from psychiatric drugs and move forward with their life. But just, definitely keep your show going. It is more awareness that's being brought about, but just having kind of what you said, people behind the scenes who are actually out here in the fight to continue just to educate people and also changing their practicing and knowing now, really, I mean, to be honest, taking your courses and reading your books, especially like with Dr. Pam Popper, that the qualifications of, of actually having a psychiatric license and going through that, I almost did it when I was younger. I'm 36 now, but for what it's worth now, and finding your work, I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I may have been something to that world. So I appreciate your work.
Thank you. And Jeremiah, the concept of intentionality is right to the heart of that difference. I don't think I've ever put it quite that way, but yes, empathy is intentional. You have to bring your spiritual awareness to bear, your intelligence to bear, your wisdom to help understand that person and perhaps to help them understand themselves. Intentionality. And we forget that all the time, that all the good things require purposiveness, planning, working at, and in this case, specific intentionality to be empathic toward another. Have you had to work very hard to overcome the being an empath in order to be empathic?
Yes, I did. Especially, I have time to go over my background and my upbringing and growing up. And before I discovered, got on my journey, to becoming a practicing coach. But yes, because I was an empath growing up, and I suffered from a lot of things, and I didn't know why. Why I always wanted to know more about somebody. I could feel their pain, and I never understood that. So so I struggled with that for a while to where I would try to turn it off. So I would become emotionless, like as a late teen, as a kind of self-preservation kind of thing. I would cut off my emotions. I didn't know how damaging that was until I started having my own mental breakdown and stuff in my early 20s. But it wasn't until I started really looking at the science behind emotional fitness and how they're meant to be expressed, and how actually learning more of yourself and then being able to learn more of yourself, develop more self-control, and then being able to be more socially aware of others, how healthy that was. So after learning the benefits of it and actually putting it into practice for myself, and feeling that, and I guess living in that, it made all the difference in the world for me.
Now, Jeremiah, am I pronouncing your name right? I'm just seeing it in print.
Yep, you got it right.
Jeremiah, it's a great name. Thank you for calling in. And we'll go to Phyllis in Michigan on being an empath. And I love getting people calling in on subjects that are sort of in a row. But Maureen, I will get to you on a somewhat different subject. Phyllis, hello. I can't hear you. Phyllis? Phyllis?
Yes, hi. Hi, Dr. Breggin. How are you?
Oh, I had to be very patient. I'm sure we're all sitting here thinking you're never going to get Phyllis. Okay.
Well, I was on the show
you wanted to talk about being an empath?
Yeah, I was on the show last week. I asked a question, and I read Judith's book on the Empath Survival Guide, and I find it very difficult to be in this world and of this world with all that's going on.
Yeah, we were talking about that with you at the end of the show, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, and I live by myself, and I feel very lonely. I feel, on an island, so to speak. And as long as I'm with my pets, I'm fine. I have, a couple of cats, and that's good company. But I love your podcasts on love and empathy and sensitivity, and I love your work. I love your philosophy, And I find that sensitive people and empaths are often kind of on the outside looking in, and I feel lonely, and I just wonder if you could comment on that.
Where do you live in Michigan?
Ann Arbor.
So you're at you're at the big university there, in that big university town.
Right.
Sometimes, well, first of all, there's always coaching, getting some coaching. There's always getting some training. There's always, trying to find a therapist. So, I mean, that can be very helpful, and it can be difficult because it's kind of like finding a friend, which is already, a problem for you, I'm sure.
Yes.
But that's one way to go. But people need to find something outside themselves that is meaningful in life to do. And I don't know, do you work?
Well, I was a therapist for over 20 years, and now I'm working on a book. I like meaning and purpose and substantial conversation. I don't go for bars or chit-chat or superficial relationships.
Right.
So,
well, there's a lot of us like that, and including a lot of people who are therapists. You don't have any network, any way of finding people?
No, I've been to study groups. I've been to courses. There's a lot of opportunity here in a college town.
Oh, I'm thinking
classes.
So much. Yeah.
And we have something called OSHER, and it's for intelligent conversations and study and topics, and there's a wealth of opportunity for lectures and that kind of thing. But I find that you can be in the middle of New York City and feel lonely. And my point was that being an empath and a highly sensitive person, it's pretty lonely. And I find that a lot of therapists are more interested in looking at the clock rather than looking at you. So, I'm a little skeptical. I'm a little cynical, probably, but it's just.
Well, I don't know how much to get into on the air, Phyllis, but something has really wounded you out there. You've got to know that. For you to feel so unable to find somebody to relate to. I mean, there are so many people out there, first of all, who need other people. And there's probably so many people you could still give to. My own experience when I'm dealing with people in therapy is once they make up their mind to become more loving and to look for people to love, not so much in the beginning to receive love, but to be open to looking, they find people to care about. Because when you do that, your whole spirit changes the way your whole self looks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something holding you back from saying, okay, I want to be loving to other human beings. And see, if I get responses, good. If I don't, that will be good for other people. It's actually on the Fresh Daily News that I didn't get to today. There's an article about how the ripple effect of when we're caring toward other human beings, it affects them just in casual relationships, and they spread that out. My wife and I went back to a restaurant that we haven't been to for a year. It's a diner, and it just doesn't serve the kind of food that we eat now as plant-based folks. And there was a woman who remembered us from a couple of years ago and who was so glad to see us, and it was quite genuine. And We spend a little time talking together. Wherever I go and sit down where there are waitresses and waiters, people start talking to my wife. They often don't talk to me. They just look at Ginger and they want to talk to her. If you make yourself more welcoming with all of your background as a therapist and your interest in understanding, if you could turn that into being interested in other people and showing it to them, you're going to find friends, and then they won't all be what you want. My mother-in-law, Jean, is a master at making everyone she meets feel like a friend. Now, that's a beginning. It isn't what you're looking for, but she walks into a room and people are talking serious stuff to her. So there's something holding you back from shining on people so that they feel like they can be with you in a more serious way and share their feelings with you. Have you read my book, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety?
No.
I hope you will get it and look at it. Just get it off Amazon. You'll probably get inexpensive used copies. And the other is The Heart of Being Helpful. And both of these books just talk about becoming a person who invites other people to relate to them. I gave it a technical term that I hardly ever think of called, but it relates so much to the topic, called empathic self-transformation. Empathic self-transformation, where when you really spend time with somebody as a therapist or a friend or a lover or a family member, if we're really in touch, we change ourselves to meet the other person. And the other person changes themselves to meet us. And that and that's a good thing, because we humans are all so isolated and so idiosyncratic and so unique that we have to, as a natural process, become more like other people, or at least more understanding of other people. I know when I'm working with patients, I'm a very different person from patient to patient. I'm talking to a 16-year-old or a 14-year-old who's really struggling. I'm going to be talking really differently to the department chairman at Cornell, who's, really on top of things. They're going to want to be relating to, in a different way, to me, each of those people. So if you could just find a way to bring out your resources, and now I'm talking, of course, to everybody who's listening, I'm talking to myself too, that we can reach out to people by literally being prepared to find how they like to communicate while they try to find out how we like to communicate. Now, there are rare exceptions where you meet somebody and the spontaneity is incredible. And quite often it's terrifying. When I mentioned before, when I met Ginger, it was so instantaneous that I ran away. We didn't get together for 10 years, quite seriously. One weekend without any physical contact except holding hands. And then over the years, we've been together 35 years, we're still getting to know each other. So even though it was so spontaneous, the depth, the richness, the nuanced understanding on so many different ways, and yet we were so different in age and background and education. But the basic workings, we were so close in how to communicate. But then over the years, it's really interesting. We've been learning more and more about each other, and we continue to change in order to be with each other. Gosh, I'm really glad I'm talking about this. This is just so incredibly important that you don't just meet somebody and that's it. You reach out to people in a caring way and then people begin to respond. I mean, in my experience, if a person who never meets anybody goes to the next conference, whatever the conference is, and looks at people as if to say, with a little look in the eye of, "Are you the one?" I cock my head when I say that. It's funny. I'm sitting here and I'm cocking my head saying, "Are you the one?" Well, all you have to do that at a conference and people are going to come up to you because you've shown some unique interest in them. And maybe some need. So, and, there are many women who get hit on when they go to the grocery store, but as soon as they decide they don't want that anymore, it just tends to go away. It's the way we look at people just transforms the responses we get. When I went on a walk in New York City after I'd been living in Ithaca, not in Ithaca, in a really small town outside of Ithaca where I lived, and where everybody smiled. If you didn't wave at somebody, the joke was if you didn't wave at somebody in a car passing you by, you had only one arm or you were from another town. And I went to New York City to be on, I think it was, I don't remember, but one of the major shows. And I was just being myself. I left my jacket, in the hotel, and I just walked around looking friendly and smiling. And I was hit upon in different ways 4 times in a block and a half. A gay man asked me if I'd like to visit with him and get to know him. I smiled and I said no, and that I wasn't gay. And I kept walking and then smiling. And then I got hit on by somebody who wanted me to take them to dinner. And then maybe we could go somewhere after dinner. And I said, well, I'm a happily married man. So I was still talking. And she said, well, would you just like a massage? And it was like 4 events or 5 events. And they weren't all, like the gay man, that wasn't weird. That was just somebody thinking I looked really friendly and maybe I was gay. Maybe I saw he was gay. So and by the way, I just closed down. I became a New York City person for the rest of the visit after my block and a half. So for all of you, this is so much about life that you really, really want to find a way to be a person when you want to be. It's intentional to be able to let people know you're open, because there are so many people who want friendship, and they are not all shallow. There are so many people who would like to have a thoughtful conversation, and they come from every social, racial, economic, religious background. Some of the men that I have felt closest to in my practice, I think back that I can think of 2 Muslim men with whom I could easily be good friends under other circumstances, and one who many years ago who was an Army officer, and he was sort of the field marshal side of me, but he was very empathic. And I'll tell you a funny story. I'm chatting away here, but I'm enjoying this. I hope you are. We were sitting together. He came to see me, and at the time, Israel was at war with the country he was coming from. There was no physical fighting because they were not touching, and I don't think there wasn't a lot of clear military action, but his country considered itself at war at the time with Israel. And he was coming to me. He was from an embassy, and he was, I think, a colonel and a fighter pilot, and he's built the way I was. He wasn't much bigger than me, and I wanted to tell him in the first visit that I'm Jewish, and I just want you to know that, and I deeply believe in and defend Israel. But we hit it off so quickly, talking about the issues he'd been thinking about his family life, and how his growing up in this authoritarian environment had really made it hard for him to be the loving, caring man he wanted to be. He just took off. This is 20 years ago. This is before Ginger. This is like 30 years ago I'm talking about. 35 years ago to be before Ginger. And we went through 3 sessions without my being able to tell him what I wanted to tell him without sounding like I was being disrupted and wasn't listening. Because he would come in and we would go to work. He would go to work. So I finally said in the middle, Muhammad, or whatever his name was, hey, I got to interrupt and say one thing I've been meaning to tell you. We've been having such great visits. But I do want you to know that I'm Jewish and I'm a real defender of Israel. He looked very serious, and he said, do you practice Judaism? I said, no. He said, a man should practice his religion. I urge you to go to temple. That was the end of the conversation. So what appears to be great differences in the people you're meeting out there, Phyllis, they may be soulmates. Mm-hmm. I think good people from different cultures are more alike each other than are most people in their own cultures. So that you're an outreaching, loving, caring, responsible human being, you'll be more like a similar Hindu or Muslim or a German or Japanese or Chinese than you will be with most of the people that you meet in your own culture. Mm-hmm. And this has been a very big revelation to me, and it's a lot about empathy. I've been thinking about it a long time, and in fact, I was asked by a really great counselor many years ago to write an introduction to a book on cross-cultural counseling. And to my shock, he took my introduction and was pleased with it, because I basically said that there's no handicap in cross-cultural counseling. Blacks don't have to talk to blacks. I just don't believe it. Jews don't have to talk to Jews. What it's really about is listening enough to the other person that you're actually listening to them. And in some ways, it's a lot easier to listen to somebody from a different culture without bringing all your prejudices in from your own culture. Mm-hmm. So if you really want to listen, it can be a breath of fresh air to listen to somebody who comes from a different culture and to gradually discover that human nature is one and the same everywhere, basic nature, with some aberrated people in there too, some people who are not so good. So I'm just here, just talking away, and encouraging Phyllis, the empath from Michigan. Reach out. Don't make assumptions. Be warm. Look at people. If you're looking for somebody to love, look at people as if are you the one. If you're looking for somebody to like, look at them. Like thinking to yourself, are you going to be the likable one at this meeting or in this class or sitting in this park or whatever else, sitting next to me in the diner? So your thoughts, Phyllis?
Yeah, that's good advice. Good advice. I'll, try to practice from this week to next week and let you know how it turns out.
Do that. Let us all know. This is very much what I do in therapy. I don't talk this much in therapy, but the lessons I give are along this line about reaching out to people. It's one of the big lessons that I give. Phyllis, thanks for calling.
Thank you.
Maureen, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you want to know about transcranial magnetic stimulation. Do you want to say anything more about that? Because I don't mind putting into each session something that's right on the topic of the psychiatric treatments too, because almost everybody who calls me has some interest in that. But I had a great flow. That's poor Maureen called in first, and we had such a great flow on empathy that I wanted to wait and just finish up. So tell me why you're calling in, and I'll tell you my response.
Yeah, I just moved to Arizona, and I called two psychiatrists to
Are you
see
there?
about safety. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
No, only broke. Yeah, now I hear you.
Okay. I just moved to Arizona, and I called two psychiatrists to see about tapering with the compounding pharmacy. And I asked them, do you do ECT? So the two different girls said no, but he does transcranial magnetic stimulation, and they use it for depression. Is that a gimmick, or what's your opinion of that? I'm not interested.
To the extent that it's, it's a placebo, hey, magic, it's a gimmick. To the extent that it could work, it means it's injuring your brain, because there is no way to pass current of any kind that's going to influence your neurons without harming them. They're not waiting to get a dose of this or that. So it just depends on whether it works. And if it works, it's not good for you. And I know that may sound simple, but that's the flat-out truth. There are no interventions in the brain that are good for it, except those that don't have any effect. Well, 1 minute left. Let me say goodbye to my wonderful audience. I've kind of letting loose more and more. You're hearing more and more of the real me. And I'm just glad to invite you into my living room office with my big window looking at the birds, and to share my thoughts and feelings with you. And again, this is Dr. Peter Breggin, if you've just tuned in, Breggin. If you enjoyed the show, you'll love the heart of being helpful. And if you can bear a maybe different viewpoint politically, you might like, wow, I'm an American. And if you want to really think more deeply than ever about these things, the guilt, shame, my book, Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety, the last third of it is about love. Thank you for being here, folks. Thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity. It's Peter Breggin, Breggin, saying goodbye. Bye-bye now.